Hey, Cotton, thanks for going out and capturing that Magnamalo for us.
No problem. What did you need it for?
Oh, we're making a boat.
Sorry, what?
A big boat. A ship. A ship with a mast.
Out of Magnamalo? Fucking, are you...
And atop that mast will be a flag.
You.
A flagship.
I don't like you.
A flagship made from a flagship.
Why are you like this?
Do you get it, Cotton?
Why did I do the quest?
Do you get it? Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, it's time to talk about the monsters, because we really don't do that enough on this channel. Specifically, the flagship monsters, the ones chosen to represent the game as a whole on the cover art. All throughout the history of the series, these monsters have had significance in the game of their origin. Some of them excellently designed creatures with somewhat questionable fights, some of them strange designs with amazing fights, some of them are incredible all around, and then some of them are Rathalos but blue. Today I'll be ranking every single one of them, including the newest addition to the club, Magnamalo, in a tiered list format. It's worth noting that as of this point, I've just not played every single game in the franchise, and therefore my opinion of each monster isn't based on how they were presented as part of their story or anything quite like that. This is simply me rating the monsters on their design, my opinion of their design, their fight design, which will include their most up-to-date fight, meaning if they are in Rise, I will be considering their Rise fight, and honestly, just how memorable and impactful they are on a first impression, on first glance, even as a better description, as that is what you really want from a monster that you choose to put on the cover art of the game itself. You want it to draw people in instantly. Without further ado then, going in game release order, Rathalos. Good monster, good fight. I don't have anything particularly against him. I consider him to be a very basic creature though. He's just sort of a straight up fantasy dragon minus 2 legs, and his fight is relatively average to me as well. He gets a bit of a boost just for being the flagship just of the series as a whole, but when comparing him to the design and fight of some of the other creatures on this list, I couldn't really justify putting him higher than C tier, which I consider to just be sort of average. Azure Rathalos, I just don't feel this one, Chief. I love the more interesting subspecies in the series that change more fundamental things about a creature, but this one really is Rathalos but blue and a couple tiny fight changes, which, by the way, make the fight worse than regular Rathalos in my personal opinion. This one was no question for me. Azure Rathalos is going to literally take over the D tier, as it's his new home now. He lives there. Kushala Daora, on nearly the opposite side of the spectrum, I absolutely adore. I have always loved the design of this creature at the very least, a monster with essentially metal flesh that uses it to stir up full-on tornadoes, the sounds that he makes while moving, I adore all of it, but for the longest time, I just despised his fight. That is until Rise, where I actually consider him one of the more fun fights in the game as a whole. I rate him quite highly now, and as a flagship specifically, I would now have him be my first A-tier monster, sitting up there by himself, and for now. Tigrex, I do so love your design. Essentially the idea of what would happen if you fused a tiger and a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is the exact reason that I refuse to call him Tigrex. He's not a fusion of a Kappa and a dinosaur. Though I would love to fight that rare species of him. His fight, however, I think is sort of boring. It's hard, but it's hard in a very repetitive manner. So with that in mind, he's going to be sharing some space with Rathalos in the C tier. Following that up though is Nergigante, who a lot of people love. Personally, his design doesn't quite strike the same note with me. I think he's cool, but not quite as cool as something like Tigrex, who I just talked about, for example. His fight, however, is a pretty good step up from Tigrex, who I just talked about, for example. Personally, I think it about evens them out together, so I'm going to put him with his pseudo-wyvern brother in the C tier of this list. Lagiacrus, Lagiacrus, no matter how you say his name, you're bound to make somebody angry, because he's the favorite monster of many of a hunter. I think his design is incredible, not the least of which for the first impression factor on the box art of a game. He's just so interesting looking. His fight is cool, but when he was landlocked, he didn't feel quite right. And underwater, he struggled from the feeling of underwater combat just sort of in general. He's an amazing creature, but just shy of a perfect flagship. So A tier it is, is for Crocodile Bundy. Get it? It's a serial killer slash animal joke. Okay, maybe that was a bit of a stretch. Zinogre is quite the cool monster. A wolf, which is a plus for me, especially being the only main series fanged wyvern for as many years as he was, making him incredibly unique. He's nothing particularly crazy standout, at least not in the same way that Lagiacrus is to me, for example, but he definitely is special. His fight is above average and has a couple of fun mechanics that only Zinogre has, and as a result of all of this, I think it makes sense for me to have Zinogre on my B tier, as the first entry to that grouping. Brachydios is an extremely cool monster. I'm really into his design. I see him sort of like the boxing kangaroo in monster form, which is probably a bit of a personal connection that makes me like him even more than an average person does, but as far as his fight goes, I find it a bit frustrating, to be real with you. I love the mechanics that he has, but his fight is just sort of pain. Raging Brachydios is a whole other story for me, but base Brachy's fight is pain. As a whole, I'm gonna place this boy on the B tier beside his third gen brother for now. Gore Magala. Oh man, I was waiting to get here, and I bet a bunch of you guys are waiting for me to get here too. I do love this monster. His design is absolutely fantastic, incredibly unique, and on top of that, his stage presence is magnificent, meaning that his box art, cover art, drawing players in is immaculate. He is the perfect monster for that in my opinion. Just the right amount of mystery and intrigue without being too radically unusual for somebody to pick up just on first glance. His fight is also incredible and quite interesting. I really hope he does come back to a Monster Hunter game in the near future, because as a flagship, he was an absolute S tier monster. I don't even think that there's a debate on that one. Following him is the original Pinecone head, Sergios, who unfortunately for me, I probably hold a bit lower than some of you, simply because my first Pinecone headed monster was Basil Geese, and I absolutely adore Basil Geese. Not that doesn't mean that I can't love both monsters, but you know, once you've seen one Pinecone headed monster, a bit of the initial wonder is missed when seeking a second Pinecone head. That said, I do still quite enjoy his design. He's very sleek. I love the fancy, unique little feet that he has, and his fight is not bad at all. He's an above average creature to me, even if he doesn't grasp me too tightly personally. So B tier is where I've decided to place him today. Then comes Astalos. Oh boy, Astalos is a good one. This may be where my personal bias shines through a bit, because I consider Astalos one of the coolest designs in the entire series as a creature, partially because of how insectoid he feels and how few insects that we actually do have, but then the way that it ties back into being a proper wyvern is wonderful. The way that the electricity plays off of his body and the patterns on his wings, it's just beautiful. His fight as a whole is just incredible, and I know I haven't talked about theme music until this point with any of the other creatures, even though some of these monsters have unbelievable themes, but Astalos, oh, Astalos's theme is something else. Like, just listen to this. Tell me that doesn't feel like you're in some sort of gladiatorial combat, almost like it's evoking the feeling of, oh man, this is going to shred me to bits or I'm gonna shred it to bits, no in between, which coincidentally is what was said by the paper shredder with an allergy to paper. This is one that I think not everyone will necessarily agree with, but for me, Astalos is an S tier flagship monster. Then comes another Fated 4 member, Gammoth the Mammoth, made of gammon. At least I assume that's where the English translation of her name came from. Anyway, her design is absolutely top tier. I consider her to be an incredible creature to watch from a distance, to ponder in the night, to read lore on, smiling to myself, to watch the cutscene of even, and to put on a game cover. Yeah, sure, quite the interesting creature too. As a fight, yeah, not so good. Definitely some redeeming factors are in there. There's some interesting parts, but on the whole, it's just not a very fun fight to me. So I'm sorry, Gammoth, but you're going down to the C tier as far as I'm concerned. Then bubbling in from the distance is, of course, Mizutsune, who you might imagine I feel quite strongly about. You're right, the design is absolutely gorgeous, and while at one time I was a bit skeptical about the whole soap, liquid, organ thing, these days my suspension of disbelief towards monsters is a bit more relaxed, and as such, over the years, Mizitsune has slipped up quite a bit in my rankings and design. As far as the fight, yeah, absolutely incredible as well. I adore it. I don't think there are any holes. It is slippy, but purposefully slippy. The beams make for fun mechanics. The bubbles are a fantastic extra layer. Yeah, you might have guessed it. S tier for good old Mizitsune here. I really do believe in that. Finishing off the Fated 4 then is Glavenus, the sword-tailed brute wyvern. And yeah, you know, the sword tail is really quite cool, but it isn't quite groundbreaking to me the way that some of these monsters are. And so the design to me is above average, but nothing quite insane. Fight-wise, also above average. Some people may like him more than me, but I am quite happy with Glavenus sitting on my B tier as a great monster, but not quite into that upper echelon of flagships in the series as a whole. Valstrax, well, I mean, come on. Do you really even need me to tell you where he goes? His design is perfect. A jet engine dragon built around the instability of dragon energy from the elements that he has just naturally. The transforming wing blades, and not to mention how that feeds into the fight itself, which is an absolute fun fest, whether you count New Age Crimson Glow Valstrax as, you know, the updated Valstrax, or just a totally separate entity, and we're only judging the old fight here. That fight was still fun as all hell. He's S tier, no question for me, he deserves it. Following him up is Bloodbath Diablos, who is one hell of a step up on the design front from his base Diablos brother. I love the wicked tail and wicked horn aspects of him, and when it comes to the fight, it's great, incredibly tough with some fun mechanics too, but I can't deny that he is just missing that little something to put him right at the very top. So for me, he's an A tier flagship monster in the Monster Hunter series. Nergigante, the flagship of the first game that I played, I think has an incredible design. I love the hedgehog dragon aesthetic, and the game cover he was on definitely worked. His fight had some fun mechanics, and while I do like the idea of learnable fights, once you learn his fight too well, it arguably becomes a bit too much of a pushover. I do quite like him though as a monster, and so he'll be an A tier flagship for me. Following him up is of course Velkhana, who as a design I think is particularly inspired. I especially love the idea of the ice growing into a spear tail which it uses as a weapon, but to this day I am still heavily annoyed by the fact that her ice beam goes through her ice wall without breaking it. How can air go through solid matter without being high enough pressure to destroy the solid matter? I don't get it. It really bothers me. And while the fight itself is generally not bad at all, this part of it is not something that I'm likely to forget anytime soon. So B tier, in my opinion, for Velkhana. Finally then, the flagship of Monster Hunter Rise itself, Stinky Boy. Yes, the lore itself says that Magnamalo is stinky and that Hellfire is essentially farts made from dead things. His design, I think, is quite cool, though there are some parts of him that I think to be a bit, maybe, over-designed. He doesn't need the pop-up spikes when he's mad. It just makes him feel more like an action figure to me than an actual animal. I don't know. Fight-wise, though, he's really quite good. I like his fight. It's not defining the new standard for a Monster Hunter fight by any means, but it is absolutely a more than functional fight. As a whole, this Stinky Boy is going to cap off this list on the B tier. And there you have it, everyone, my full Monster Hunter flagship tier list as of 2021. I can't wait for more games to release in this franchise, in my opinion, to honestly simply develop further on each monster over time, because I'm sure there are already comments on this very video about how my opinion on a monster sounds different than it was a year ago when I last talked about the flagships, and yeah, it probably is. Time passes, opinions develop, and sometimes straight up change based on life experiences. What about you? Do any flagships fare better in your opinion now than they did when they first came to the series? How do you feel about my placements as a whole? Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.